Thank you, Carlo. I am honored to be here today in such a distinguished group of producers. And we're going to chat a bit today about how do we think about combining diagnostics that Dr. Zimmerman talked about and the immunity that Dr. Murtaugh talked about into a comprehensive plan to improve your individual farm. So we're going to try to share that story with you today. So I want to talk a little bit about where we're at. I graduated from veterinary school in 1994. I've had a bit of an interesting career, and I like to tell people that I'm a veterinarian by training and a pig farmer by habit. And I've spent most of my career actually working in pig farming. Today, I work at the university attempting to translate technology outside of the university into pig farms and cattle units. And our private group, our private practice group, sees about 8% of the works with about 8% of the pigs that are produced in the United States and about 15% of the beef cattle produced in the United States. So working really on technology application, data management, and human resource management. So very much at a strategy level and less at a hands-on level in a lot of these cases. So 1994 started all this. And I graduated in May, and in July, the original vaccine against PRRS was introduced 20 years ago. And so really for my entire career, this disease and this vaccine has defined what I've done. And it's been a roller coaster. We've had good times, we've had bad times, but we certainly have learned a lot over the last 20 years about how to really effectively manage disease. And although we aren't perfect with PRRS today, it certainly is not the economic consequence that it was even 5 years ago as we've adapted the vaccine and other integrated technologies, and that's really what I want to share with you today. So a little bit about U.S. farms. We have farms in the U.S. like about everyone else, large breeding herds. As I go around the world, we see these similar type units with breeding houses and farrowing units. The one advantage we do have in the U.S. is that you'll notice this is right in the middle of very productive cropland, and so our corn and soybeans don't come on a boat. They literally come out of the field a few feet and end up in pigs, and that's a big competitive advantage for the U.S. and also reflects how we think about raising livestock. The typical U.S. production system, and I'll outline this for you here. We typically work in a pod today with a genetic multiplier farm with every farm dedicated to purpose. That would produce its own replacements, typically both PRRS and F1s, sending those to get dedicated to gilt grow outs, which would feed multiple commercial sow farms. We tend to have multi-site production in the United States today with the growing pig sites separated from the sow farms. And because of some permit issues on how big the farms can be, typically we merge multiple of these commercial sow farms into one weaned pig flow. So we have a lot of commingling of pigs, and this creates some significant challenges on how we think about disease. But I wanted you to understand that before we move forward. So big pig farms in the U.S. look like big pig farms around the rest of the world. We have mostly individually stalled gestation barns. We're transitioning to pens. We think that'll have some real implications on both disease management and productivity. Finisher pigs look like finisher pigs look like finisher pigs. They're the same all over the world. And about the time you think that everything in the U.S. is perfect, that's not true. We still don't quite get it right all the time, and we occasionally have the pigs and the cows mixed together. So not everything in America is right all the time, and so take all that with a grain of salt. So this is really the important message in it. As big a country as we have, it's very different. You'll notice here, this is Chicago and this is Lake Michigan, and so in this graph, the red and the orange represent where we raise corn and soybeans. You'll notice this kind of crescent-shaped area around the Great Lakes. This is Iowa, where Dr. Zimmerman showed you before, in southern Minnesota. Some of the most productive farmland in the world. Very intensive cropping operations. And if you notice, this is the yellow is pigs in this graph. You'll notice there's a yellow hue in that same shape of the corn. We have a huge country. We raise a lot of pigs, not as many as China, but we raise about 106 million pigs a year in the United States. But those pigs are concentrated in actually a fairly narrow band here and a fairly narrow band on the East Coast. What that leads to is, in this, every blue dot represents about 50 farms. You'll notice a really intense concentration of pig farming in the area where we have a lot of corn, with some other dense pockets here, and that's really always been based on historical grain price. This leads to pockets in the U.S. where we have really intense pig production in very, very high densities, which has shaped how we think about PRRS and the regional transmission of PRRS and other diseases between farms. So that raises the question, right? That's all really nice, Jim. You're giving us a picture tour. But how do I make my farm better, right? That's why you all came here today, is how do I improve my farm? So we're going to spend some time talking about that. So I think there's some challenges as we think about working through problems on the farm, right? We show up and we're not meeting performance expectations. We're not making as much money. We're not having as many pigs per sow per year as we want. And so we have to answer that question, why? Why are we not doing that? And we often like to blame disease. We did have some sick pigs, right? Therefore, it must be disease that's causing the problem. I'm going to challenge us that disease is probably not the most common reason that we are not making as much money as we want to make on our pig farms. And we'll talk through that a little bit. And this is a famous quote. So Charlie Munger is if you've all heard of Warren Buffett, the famous investor from Omaha, who's one of the best known investors in the world, his chief advisor is a guy named Charlie Munger. And Charlie said, to a man with a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And what he means by that is if we go in with a preconceived notion that it must be disease, then it always looks like disease, even when it may not be. So, oops. Okay. I'm going to challenge us to have this principle, that infectious disease is not a problem. It is merely a symptom of many other things that are broken on the farm. And so what we see is the clinical disease, right, where we get load, or the amount of pathogen, greater than the amount of immunity in the herd. So we get the expression of clinical disease. But why is that load there? Well, it's really probably because the delicate balance. Somebody asked Dr. Murtaugh this morning, how long does immunity last? And in the back, I thought, well, it depends. Because immunity depends upon how much challenge there is. And if you don't have much challenge, then you don't have to have much immunity. So immunity might last a long time. If you have a lot of challenge, you have to have a lot of immunity. So what disrupts that delicate balance? And the thing that most often disrupts that delicate balance is we have process challenges, or how we farm the pigs challenges this delicate ecosystem. So things like ventilation disruptions, we get humidity too high, or we're mixing pigs, we're not using all in all out flow, or we have poor animal handling, we induce stress in the animals, etc., etc. There's a multitude of things, but disease is just an indicator of all the things that go wrong from a management standpoint, not necessarily because the pathogen is there. William Osler is a famous physician and really taught physicians how to think proactively. He's the foundation of why modern medicine is the way it is. But he said the good patient treats the good physician treats the disease. The great physician treats the patient. And in a pig farm, the patient is really our farm, right? Not just the pig, but all the pigs in the farm. So how do we treat that holistically to solve the problem, and not just go, oh, I have PRRS, or oh, I have APP, but I have a problem on the farm, and how do I treat the whole farm together? So if we send diagnostics to the laboratory, we often get a result back, right? So in this case, this is an image of Pasteurella, the Pasteurella bacteria that causes bacterial pneumonia. So if I get a Pasteurella result, do I have Pasteurella? I don't know. All pigs have Pasteurella. So what I really want to know is, in the context of the Pasteurella, what did the lung look like that it came out of? Do I have pneumonia, which you can see here, with the Pasteurella? Now that tells me something more, because now I know, wait a minute, I have a change in the animal that's associated with the disease, with the pathogen. But even that doesn't tell me everything, because what I really want to know is that that lung is attached to a pig. And how is the pig performing? Is the pig losing weight? Is the pig gaining weight? Is the pig raising the correct number of offspring per year? What's the performance impact of the disease? And to understand what's happening, I really have to understand that that pig is part of a much larger system, of a barn, of other pigs, of feed delivery, nutrition availability, etc. The global picture is what we have to understand if we're really going to understand what role Pasteurella is playing in our losses, or PRRS, or influenza, or PED. So we're here to talk about PRRS today. And PRRS is part of swine respiratory disease. So SRD stands for swine respiratory disease. And swine respiratory disease isn't just PRRS or influenza or Pasteurella. It's really a multifactorial group of things that have to work in concert to actually create disease. So the presence of PRRS alone doesn't cause very much disease, but if I have PRRS plus environmental stress, so the ventilation was wrong, and I have bad caregivers, and I have mixing of pigs inappropriately, I now can get SRD. So I have to think about respiratory disease in pigs and respiratory losses in pigs from a holistic standpoint of all the things that are going wrong. And so how do I use that information therefore to make my farm better? So that's again good, but we're here about solutions today. How do we create a solution to fix the farm? So how do I go from standing looking over a pig with pneumonia to a solution? So I want to orient you to this chart fairly quickly, but along this axis, we're going to talk about how aggressively do I gather data. So, do I know how many pigs are sick? Do I run diagnostics? Do I check the ventilation? Do I understand how my people are working? How much data do I gather? And then how many decisions do I make off of that data on this axis? So down here I don't make many decisions, and up here I make a lot of decisions. So if we think about, and this is well-described forms of reasoning, there are a lot of people who go get one piece of data and they stop. I sent one pig in and I got PRRS, therefore it must be PRRS. Not very effective for a solution. There are other people who get one piece of data. I sent one pig in and I got PRRS. And they make one decision and they never change off of that. Every disease for the next 3 years is PRRS because they don't collect any more data. And then you've got the other group down here who just collects data and they keep sending diagnostics in, but they never make a decision. They never change what they're doing. What we really want is to be in this upper right box where I send some information in. I have coughing pigs. Okay. I need to submit some diagnostics, and that diagnostic tells me I have PRRS and Pasteurella. So I need to do something else. So now I'm going to go collect the production records and say, when are the pigs dying? Now I'm going to make it. So I collect my production records, and now I make another decision to say, we're going to vaccinate the pigs. I use an iterative process back and forth to investigate and work through the solution from a reasoning standpoint. So we call this active reasoning, and this is a critical skill that's allowed us to move forward in our management of herds and not just fixate on, it's PRRS, therefore we're going to do this. So how do we do that? I like to know where I'm going, and I like to use a compass as a way to reason through that. So we can think about going north, south, east, and west. But to get there, right, I could go northeast, or I could go north-northeast. but it's easier if I just think about 4 coordinates. So if I put things in buckets, if I think in big piles, and we call those case definitions, it makes my navigation of my thought process easier. So I want to bucket up the things that I learn into standard definitions to help move my thought process forward. So let's talk about PRRS, and let's talk about how we might create some buckets for PRRS. So Gerald Holtkamp in the US, as part of the American Association of Swine Veterinarians, published a standardized list of herd statuses for breeding herds. And those are stages 1 through 4. And I want to use this illustration to help you think through those. And they're really buckets, they're case definitions. So stage 1 farms are farms that are producing positive pigs all the time. They have positively infected sows and positively infected pigs. And so we would represent those as really the house being on fire. There's no control. Everything is out of control, right? And so eventually, there's no more wood left, right? So the house quits burning. So now it's just a pile of embers. Well, these farms we call stage 2 or stage 2A in this particular case. And in this case, I now have, the sows aren't aborting anymore. The sows aren't infected, but I still am making a lot of positive pigs. I still have a bad impact coming downstream. And so I've got these 2A farms. And then ideally what I've got is I've got sows that are protected and immune that are not shedding positive pigs. And I like to represent that with a nice healthy green forest. Because they're protected from disease, they're robust and healthy, and they're not producing positive pigs. And if I have a naive farm, again, I'm not producing positive pigs, but a naive farm is really like a pile of dry kindling, in that they're completely susceptible to infection again. So we like to use these buckets to think about how we're going to manage PRRS and create systems to manage PRRS around that. Until we got to this approach in the United States, we made very, very little progress because we couldn't decide what a positive stable farm was versus an active farm, and everybody had a different definition. So once we defined these very carefully, we could then make progress with respect to management. So how do you define those carefully? Well, we have to measure. And I'm not going to spend a long time today talking about how we measure. Dr. Zimmerman certainly gave us a lot of good ideas this morning. But basically, careful measurement of the weaned pig is where we start. We like to know what percentage of the pigs are infected at the time of weaning to classify the herds. So stage 1 herds have positive pigs at weaning, and they have positive infected sows, and so we could measure pigs at birth and they would be infected as well. Stage 2A herds have positive pigs at weaning, but negative pigs at birth are non-infected sows. So the virus transmission is occurring in the farrowing house. Stage 2B herds have actually negative pigs at weaning. So our standard monitoring process to define this is to monitor weaned pigs with serum, because it's easier for us to test baby pigs. We bleed 30 weaned pigs per week for at least 8 weeks in a row, and if all those 8 weeks in a row testing are negative, then we say, the farm must be stage 2B. If we have any positives, then it's stage 2A, and if we have positive pigs at birth, then it's stage 1. So it's a walked up category, but we accurately measure this. To manage cost, we tend to pool the PCR testing. So we will pool 5 serum samples into one, so we run 6 PCR tests per week. And because of the way we sample, it doesn't matter how big the farm is, so we'll use that same protocol on a 5,000 sow farm or a 1,000 sow farm. So a very standard testing approach to help us understand where we're at. It's been very effective, and it's allowed us to take the next step, which is how do we drive management. So we can talk about using diagnostic tests or diagnostic laboratories, but those things are expensive and not always available, right? In Asia, you don't have nearly the access that we have, luckily, in the US, and which is really unrivaled. And our access to rapid, low-cost diagnostics. So what are other things we can do to help monitor that are just as useful and actually have to be put in context of the diagnostic testing that we do? So this is a records test, and so this is the week of the year along the x-axis, and this is number of pigs along the y-axis. And what you'll notice is this is a 3,600 sow farm that was clicking along here, some variation week to week, but basically farrowing about 2,200 pigs per week and weaning about 2,000. And then all of a sudden, the spread between total born and live born went, right? So this is the stillborn rate, and then breeding mortality followed that. So, merely by monitoring the production records, we could understand what was happening on the farm. This is not PRRS light. You'll notice there's 6 weeks that this farm did not wean any pigs. This is big boy PRRS. And in a naive herd is obviously a serious economic consequence. So that's the breeding herd. What about grow finish pigs? And so let me orient you to this chart. Along the x-axis is month, and this represents all the groups closed in that month for a given source of pigs. Here we're tracking that, and about 91% of the pigs sold, 91% of the pigs that were placed at weaning were sold to market. So 9% of them were not sold. There was a 9% shrink. So we're going along here and we're monitoring the diagnostics, and this is a positive stable farm, so a 2B farm. And all of a sudden, we see a drop-off in the percentage of the pigs sold, so we could track this actually in real time. So we saw a 6% drop-off, which caused us to go back and trigger and do testing at the sow farm to say, we actually have some PRRS. So counting pigs is a valuable diagnostic process to help you understand what's happening in your herd. We like to normally take that one step further in the United States and think about economics. So we looked at, in this case, 235 groups of pigs, all with one owner. We sampled those pigs multiple times during the growing period to see if they went positive or not to PRRS. So we knew they were negative when they were placed, and then we monitored them during the growing period to see what happened. So we said, okay, let's compare the positive groups to the negative groups. And in this case, we said that a dead pig, the value of the dead pig was about $50 US, and realizing these costs are not maybe applicable to you, and they're not applicable to all the US systems. This is applicable to the one system in the United States. So about $50 is what we estimated a dead pig cost. So about 2% difference in mortality. So we had a dollar increase. PRRS cost us $1 for mortality. They run feed about 3 days longer to get the same weight. So we had a 33-cent cost of increased feeding. It cost us about 12 cents a day. And they took about 5 extra kilograms of feed to get to market. So 10 pounds or 5 kilograms of feed to make it. So we can now estimate that PRRS actually cost us in the grow finish operation about $2.84 a pig at the time. That's dynamic. It changes every day. But the most important part of that was, if you look here, 55% of the total cost was in feed utilization. And so the ability to actually monitor feed usage by group, which is by far your biggest costs everywhere in the world, is a huge indicator of really telling us what is the cost of PRRS in the growing pig, and how much of this happened. So this was the inapparent infections. We'd have never known these pigs were infected if we hadn't tested. And yet, not really a big difference in mortality, but a huge difference in how efficiently they utilize feed. We've taken that one step further in the US, where we're now monitoring by regions. So we can say what's happening within a region to help us understand how does virus move between farms and where it's going. This map represents a region of pigs, with each dot representing a farm. And we color-coded the virus by the strain, and that's what's represented over here. So the red dots are all the same virus, and you'll notice that it was here and here and here, but interspersed with this we had a different virus which was coded by green, and we had a third virus coded by yellow, and the black sites were not infected. This allowed us to go back and start to ask the questions about how does the virus move between farms, and what biosecurity practices do we need to put in place. but again, it's the next add-on to health monitoring, and we scaled that up to a national level. There's a project that I've been fortunate to participate in that represents about 23% of the sows in the industry. It's coordinated by Bob Morrison's group at the University of Minnesota. That's the PRRS Incidence Prevalence Project. And so each week, these 200 and some odd farms report if they had an outbreak of PRRS or not. In this top chart this is every week from the fall of July of 2009 till the end of October of this year. And every time the blue line crosses the red line, we're in technically an outbreak, and this is an analysis tool to allow us to understand if we have an outbreak or not. So what you'll notice is the middle of October of 2009, the middle of October of 2010, the middle of October of 2011, the middle of October of 2012. The peaks are kind of the same height. PRRS looks the same every year. And then last fall happened. It was a month later, and the peak wasn't as high. So we've now got a context to say what changed, and is this likely to happen this year or not? So it's a way for us to understand as an industry, are our practices working globally or not globally? We will tell you that the percentage of pigs and these pigs are mostly in the belt that I showed you, where it's very high swine density. The percentage of pigs vaccinated in this region is about 3 times higher here than it was here. So one of the questions is this a regional effect of vaccine? The vaccination rate stayed about the same. We'll find out this fall. Remember, we had PED in the US last fall as well, and so biosecurity got better, and it may just be an effect of actually better biosecurity, but we'll find out over the next several weeks. So that's really good. I've shown you some examples, but I still haven't gotten to a solution. So I haven't done my job if I don't get you to a solution today. So we're going to go back to our friend on fire here and our 4 buckets. The question becomes that these 2 stages are not economically viable. Right? We all know we don't like this because this is the outbreak. The house is on fire. We're having abortions and high pre-weaning mortality. But believe it or not, this stage is just as expensive when we measure it economically because of the huge losses in pre-weaning mortality. In the US, the difference, or in post-weaning mortality, excuse me. In the US, the difference in nursery mortality between this group and this group is often in excess of 15%. So nursery mortality here would be 17 to 18%, and nursery mortality in this bucket would be about 2%. It's a huge cost difference. And in the US, if a pig dies while he's in utero, right, he's aborted, that doesn't have much cost because I haven't fed him yet. But once I've weaned him and put feed into him, he has a very different cost curve, and so nursery and finishing, particularly finishing mortality, is extremely expensive. So a huge difference between these. Even though the sow farm looks good here, the downstream performance is still really bad. So I can't live here, so the question becomes, how do I get to the bottom of the page? Right? How do I get to a more stable state? And we can talk about, should I take the herd negative or should I take the herd positive? I'll give you a rule of thumb. If the herd is likely to experience PRRS within 3 years, so if it's likely to get a new virus more frequently than every 36 months, we like to manage the farms in the 2B status. This has been a major change in the US, and it's from work done by Daniel Linares in his PhD project, which suggested that those herds that are naive, that experience an outbreak, have a much more severe outbreak than those herds that do not have prior immunity. It's about 1,300 pigs per 1,000 sows. So 1.3 pigs per sow if this farm gets infected versus this farm getting infected. So when we run the economics on that, it's about 3 years. So I can tolerate, I want to take them negative because these farms do perform a bit better. But the cost of running these farms positive versus the value of running them negative is outweighed by the fact if I have new introductions. So in the US today, in that region that I showed you, where all the blue dots are, the majority of farms are actually being managed as positive stable today with vaccine because of the economic benefit. So we're going to spend the rest of our time talking about how do I move farms into this 2B category. How do I move them into positive stable and keep them there? That's the ticket. And not how do I get farms naive? Because I don't believe in most of Asia, in fact in most of the world, that running farms naive is probably going to be long-term sustainable unless you're very, very isolated. So, how do I do that? This is the 5-step process that Boehringer's published. It's an adaptation of the scientific method, and it's really using evidence-based medicine to improve productivity and guide PRRS management. We have used this process extensively in our control of PRRS in the US, quite frankly for other diseases as well, because it works for all diseases. But it has been fundamental in our improvement of management of PRRS over the last 5 years. So what is this 5-step process? Well, first I have to know the goal, and we've just talked about that. And really at a high level, what's the goal? The goal, right, is do I take it positive or negative, and how do I do that? We'll talk a little bit about the goal, but I have to set a goal. Once I understand the goal, I want to know where I'm at. So I want to know which one of the 4 boxes. Is the house on fire, or am I really naive? And how do I know that? So we need to have a monitoring program to figure out where I'm at. I have to understand what I can't do. So a farm that has on-site bores has a very different risk pattern than a farm that's taking PRRS negative semen from the outside. And how do I control that, and what are my constraints? Only at that point do I come up with solutions. So we haven't decided what we're going to do until we really understand these top 3 steps. And then once I have the solutions, I have to put them in place and monitor them. And these first 3 pieces and the last piece, so 1 through 3 and 5, are by far the most important parts of this process. Knowing where I'm going to go, and then once I get there, did I do it, and is it working? So this goal, and I put it down as our goal, but I will tell you this goal is probably a goal that applies globally. I want to produce the most pigs that are free of virus for the greatest amount of time. Right? Sow farms generally, our objective is to make more pigs. That's why they're here. They're only here to make more pigs to feed. And I really want those pigs to be of highest value, so there's a number, a quantity, and a quality. And the quality is really, in this case, freedom of disease at the time of weaning. So I want to do that for the greatest amount of time. And as I said, that in most cases, that means if I have risk of PRRS introduction, I want to run those farms positive stable, because that minimizes the losses to make the greatest amount of pigs and minimizes the amount of time that those pigs are going to shed. So how do we get that done? That's how we set the goal, but what are we going to do that? There's really 2 tools we have, and I alluded to this earlier. But the first thing I can do is I can minimize the load. I can minimize the amount of virus on the farm, and we'll talk about how we do that. We spent a lot of time working in that area. And I'm going to maximize immunity. Those things have to work in concert. And if they do not work in concert, we will not be successful. And this is finally where we've gotten smart in the US and figured this out. So, it's a question of how. When we think about minimizing load, I was fortunate to be part of a group of the AASV where we published a set of recommendations in 2012 on how to manage PRRS based upon herd status. So this is available in the AASV annual meetings. I know some of you are members, or Boehringer can certainly get you access to that. But this is a well-published document and really based out management strategies based upon risk. So how does that work? And we've talked about this, I'll run through this quickly, but positive stable farms that have lots of virus, positive unstable farms that have lots of virus that are relatively recent to infection have different management strategies from those farms which are negative or those farms that are positive stable because they have less virus. The point of the management strategy is to minimize transmission or minimize load, and to do that I have to be more aggressive when I'm active than when I'm not active. So what does that look like? Well, I want to define my routes of transmission. And so those really are, I can move virus sow to sow, I can move virus sow to pig, or I can move virus pig to pig. And there's lots of ways virus moves sow to sow, and there's lots of ways virus moves pig to pig. And so I want to create management strategies that minimize that. And it really means I have to translate the routes of virus transmission into the management practices that occur on the farm. I have to take science and translate it to farm so that my caregivers on the farm know what to do, and this is a critical step. So what does that look like? Again, I apologize this is so small, but the take-home messages are in the paper if you want to get that. But basically, we think about things that manage sows. So how do we change needles? Do we other things? We talk about how we manage the farrowing house, particularly with farrowing house flow. And finally, what do we do with pigs, or how do we move pigs in the farrowing house? So if we have lots of virus and pigs shed virus to other pigs, we actually minimize or eliminate cross-fostering to make the long-term goal rather than the short-term goal of saving every pig. So how do we maximize immunity, the other half of that? So there's really two paths to immunity when we think about immunizing animals, and that is to allow them to be exposed to field virus, or we can use vaccine. So modified live vaccine or attenuated vaccine, as Dr. Murdaugh described it this morning. We know that using attenuated vaccine, we've historically in the U.S. allowed to use field virus. We have very good data, partially based on the Linares study, partially based on a lot of other work that's been done, that modified live vaccine is safer. Let me say that again. It is safer, it induces less disease, and it produces more consistent results to have better outcomes than when we allow field virus to transmit on its own. The difference between those is, again, about 1.3 pigs per sow of natural field virus exposure against modified live vaccine exposure. Big difference in performance for us to use vaccine compared to using field virus, and so we've switched this, and this has been a big switch in the US, but it's made a huge difference in our ability to stabilize sow herds, to use MLV in those sow herds as opposed to using field virus for that exposure process when we have outbreaks as a way to calm it down. So how do we use it? And I think this is really important. We're going to talk a little bit about this, but we've had to learn this lesson the hard way. If we have herds that are stage 1, we mass vaccinate all animals on the site 2 times, 30 days apart. When I say all animals, I mean all animals. So if there are finisher pigs on the site, the finisher pigs get vaccinated. But we have to vaccinate the entire site, because if we only vaccinate part of the animals, we allow the virus to continue to move because the herd immunity isn't high enough. It takes 2 doses. I tell my clients, I don't always know what to tell you what to do. I can tell you what not to do. I can tell you that partially vaccinating the site, and I can tell you giving 1 dose does not work. We've done it too many times to not have good outcomes. So we like to vaccinate the herds twice. We typically stop gilt introductions back into the sow farm until we get the sow farm to quiet down, because we're trying not to have kindling on the fire. And then ongoing, we'll vaccinate the gilts twice, 30 days apart, at least 30 days prior to entry. And if we have sow farms that are in unstable areas, or where we can't stabilize those single site times farms, we typically vaccinate the sows 4 times a year. So we mass vaccinate the sow herd 4 times a year. We do not vaccinate during pregnancy. We tried that in the US. That was called the 660 program in the United States. That particular program, and I happen to be mentored by the guy who came up with it, that particular program cost us more pigs than anything else. It set PRRS vaccinology back in the United States 10 years because we tried that program. It is an abject failure for long-term stabilization. Please don't make the mistakes we've made. You do not have to repeat our stupidity. So just in case you didn't think I thought this was important, I'm going to talk about it one more time. If we're vaccinating a herd and we don't vaccinate everyone, it's like having a forest where I've got some healthy trees that are immune, but I've got these dead logs or these animals that are not immune laying around. And eventually there's enough dead logs laying around that one spark, or one little bit of virus, catches the whole forest on fire again. The whole farm is burning again. And even the good green trees, the healthy trees, are burned up in the process because the load overwhelms the immunity. So we want to keep the whole herd on parallel at the same time to maximize that protection. So what about pigs? We have the same tools in pigs that we have in sows. We've got to minimize immunity, or minimize load and maximize immunity. When we think about minimizing load in pigs, we're really talking about how do we have batch production. We have converted a lot of farms in the United States at less than 2,500 sows to farrowing once every 4 weeks, so that we have better batches and grow finish to minimize the amount of load. It's been highly efficacious, and we're seeing more of that even in big farms with PED, because it's allowed us to clean the farrowing house out and really make some progress. We are big believers in unidirectional flow, i.e. fallback pigs do not come back, all pigs move forward. That is a huge issue in finishing barns, that we have to keep moving pigs out if we're going to improve health. And then we can talk about how we move people, and most importantly, are we really making sure that the barns are clean and dry between groups, and we have the pigs clean and dry. So what about maximizing immunity in pigs? I've alluded to this numerous times, but I want to start here. The most important thing you can do as a pig farmer is food, water, and a dry place to sleep. Excellent management is the foundation of good health control, and if we do not have that in place, we will not be successful, because that allows the pig's immune system to respond. After that, we can think about using vaccine in pigs. Our rule of thumb is based on the economics that if there's a 50% chance that pigs are going to be exposed to PRRS, that we go ahead and vaccinate those pigs at weaning. It makes us about a 4-to-1 return, so we get about $4 back for every dollar we invest. That number has been much larger with high pig prices. If you look at that original map that I gave you where all the blue dots are, 100% of those pigs are exposed to PRRS virus. There's a very low percentage of areas in the United States today that pigs during grow finish do not become exposed, hence we're vaccinating a very high percentage of the pigs in grow finish today because of the economic returns we get. I want to emphasize that as well. PRRS vaccine isn't free, but we don't measure it as a cost. We measure it as the margin we get back. So what is our return on the vaccine investment that we make? And we can very consistently demonstrate about a 4-to-1 return, so we get $4 back for every $1 we spend. We believe that continues to be a very good investment, because I can't put my money in the bank and get that kind of money back. Right? If I give the bank $1, I get $1.02 or $1.03 back at the end of the year. If I put $1 in PRRS vaccine, because I'm going to vaccinate that pig twice, I get $8 back. Or I'm going to grow that pig twice, right? I'm going to turn that space twice, I get $8 back. I can't make that kind of return anywhere else, and so we've continued to use the vaccine very extensively in pigs, and that's been a big change and really helped us move it forward. So generally, to help you understand how do we vaccinate pigs at weaning, how do we vaccinate pigs in the U.S., I just want to give you kind of a highlight view. We obviously do not have pseudorabies or Ojeski's disease in the U.S. We do not have classical swine fever. We've eradicated both of those diseases, so you'll not see that on here. And we've always been FMD free, so fairly limited vaccination strategy. But basically, gilts pre-beating, we're going to give those girls some parvoleptoviria and PRRS. 2 doses, 4 weeks apart, at least 4 weeks ahead of breeding. So we want some good time to build immunity there. And we'll typically booster those animals with some mycoplasma and some Circo prior to going in. Very limited vaccination strategy normally in the breeding herd, and we try to do a lot of this stuff early in gestation so we do not cause abortions. And in PRRS positive herds, we're trying to not inject animals after day 56 of gestation because of the risk of dragging PRRS virus around, because PRRS virus can cross the placenta after day 56. You notice here we'll do this 4 herd time per year on mass vaccination. And then in piglets, we extensively today will give circovirus, mycoplasma, and PRRS at the time of weaning, so typically in the farrowing crate. We use a lot of the 3-flex products, so Circoflex, Mycoflex, and PRRS MLV mixed together because it's convenient, it's efficacious, and it's safe. I have clients that we wean in excess of 100,000 pigs a week. So if I go to a 2-dose product or I have to add an injection, we're talking about an additional 100,000 injections a week, which really becomes a barrier with our people. So how do we combine this up? This has been a lifesaver for us to being efficacious and making sure we're getting pigs vaccinated in an effective manner. So to summarize, we have to remember that disease is really a complex phenomenon, right? And it's the farm and it's all these things together that work in concert to cause disease. And disease, remember, is a symptom, not the cause of failures in the program. So we've got to think about that as a symptom and a flag for us to go do something else. It's very beneficial that we think about using buckets and how do we have case definitions so we can all talk about the same things. And to get things accurately in those case definitions, I have to measure. And once I measure, then I can direct my management in a systematic fashion around that measurement. And finally, we have 2 tools, and I have to exploit both of them in my management strategies, which include minimizing load, or minimizing the amount of exposure, and then maximizing immunity. And that often involves vaccine, and that involves mass vaccination to improve performance. So I thank you, and Carlo, the floor is yours.
Ooh, I don't know about you, but I think I need a break. Let's have a short break and come back at 3:30. That's okay with you? Grab a coffee and then come back.